Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the ETS Travel Podcast. Today, we're going to be sharing with you our new Christmas series, getting you excited for the season of Advent. So the very first place we're going to visit is, of course, where Christmas story all began. So we're going to talk about Nazareth. You know, everybody gets really excited about Bethlehem. It's in all the songs and things like that, but everybody kind of forgets about Nazareth. And if you're really going through the full story of Christmas and with the angel visiting, that's where it all truly began. So, of course, Bethlehem is where Jesus was born, but Nazareth is where the good news was truly first heard. So, a lot of people remember Mary being visited, and they kind of think that's that for Nazareth. But, it really did play a critical role throughout the Gospels and would have been visited by Jesus throughout his ministry as well. And what's really interesting, in all the times I've visited, is how much Nazareth has changed since the time of Jesus and Mary. So, it went from this really small village of 200 to 400 people to it's a much larger city today. And uniquely, it is probably one of the largest majority Arab cities within Israel. So it has a lively Arab community, all getting along with everyone. And so it's changed a lot. So, Nazareth continues to be a place where, God continues to work and has worked since that time. So, I would love, John, if you could share with us a little bit about kind of understanding more about first century Nazareth in the time of Mary.
Sure. So, like you said, God does work in unexpected places here. So to understand Nazareth, like you said, because, in all the songs we hear about Bethlehem and, Nazareth is, the more you get into the scriptures, Nazareth, of course, appears, but it's kind of easy to see how it would be kind of an afterthought for some in the grand scheme of things. Because, like you said, historically speaking, Nazareth likely, like you said, probably only had a population of about 200 to 400 people. Small agricultural village, so it wasn't on any major trade paths. It wasn't, any of the bigger areas that was in Israel at the time in the Holy Land. So it's kind of easy to see how it was, an afterthought or forgotten in some sense. We have a quote actually from John chapter 1, verses 46, and Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" So
It definitely was like a backwater.
Exactly.
It wasn't important to the Romans that ruled it at the time. They were all hanging out in Sepphoris because that was a big major trade city. So, it was just, a bunch of farmers kind of growing stuff out there and not really thought of.
Yeah. It's something that was, could be thought of as unimpressive or, easily dismissed because it wasn't along any of those trade routes, like you said there.
Yeah. And definitely, if you visit Nazareth today, it's one of the greatest examples you'll see within the Holy Land of, Christians, Arabs, Jews all living together, even though it's a majority like Arab town, as I said. So, it's remarkable in that regard if you want to learn about modern Israel and things like that. But it also really pounds home kind of how humble Jesus's origins were. Mary most likely was like the daughter of a farmer. Joseph was a carpenter. So them getting married, they're were not rich people. They were definitely very, very common and things like that. So, Jesus's origins and coming from Nazareth, definitely very, very humble. But it's amazing to see how much present day Nazareth has grown. And, it's an absolutely beautiful community to visit. It has some amazing sites that we're going to share a little bit more about, So to start off first, one of my favorite places to visit when I go to Nazareth, is of course the Chapel of the Annunciation. So this is the church that celebrates where the angel came and told Mary that she was going to bear the Lord.
The Annunciation, Nazareth is the place where the Christmas story begins, and we know Gabriel sent to Nazareth, and we see in Luke chapter 1 verses 26 and 27. In the 6 months, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. So we see God sends Gabriel not to a queen or a priest, but Mary, a young woman of a peasant village. So that kind of goes over, those, humble beginnings. They weren't in any way wealthy and anything like that. So then we find here in Luke chapter 1, verses 38, and Mary said, "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word." This moment, Mary, yes, her fiat happens in Nazareth, not Bethlehem. So there's also some significance there for Nazareth as well. And as far as implications for Christmas, obviously the Incarnation begins with the Annunciation, not with the manger. Pilgrims visiting Nazareth enter the physical location where heaven first touches earth in the Christmas narrative. So, and then there's also a lot of other sites too that are connected to this moment. Did you want to go over some of those?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So of course, with the Basilica of the Annunciation, tradition holds this is where angel appeared to Mary. When you're going through the lower church area, you actually see the grotto that they believed was where Mary's physical home was at the time. And in the upper church, you see absolutely beautiful modern artwork with all kinds of Marian imagery. And then, of course, not too far away from it, you have St. Joseph's Church. So this was built over caves associated with Joseph's workshop. And, this is where the Holy Family would have spent some of their daily life. They made the pilgrimage to Bethlehem because of the census, but they returned to Nazareth. So this would have been where, Jesus would have had his younger formative years in this area. So, when you're visiting these sites, you really get to sense a connection to Jesus's past and a better understanding of, his childhood and everything post Bethlehem. So, a lot of people kind of write off Nazareth, but, it's the before and it's the after of Bethlehem.
Like we said, Nazareth was kind of an afterthought. So Nazareth's low reputation aligns with the Messiah's imagery from Isaiah 53. So from Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, it reads, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, a branch from his roots shall bear fruit." The Hebrew word branch, netzer, echoes Nazarene. So there's a little bit of some relevance there. And then also for spiritual significance, visiting Nazareth connects pilgrims with Jesus' prophetic identity. And Nazareth also symbolizes humility, hiddenness, and God's surprising work. You'd want to explain to clients that Nazareth connects Old Testament prophecy with Jesus' early life, making it a must-see location for biblical literacy. We know that, although he was born in Bethlehem, most of the time, a lot of his time was spent here in Nazareth.
When you're considering, okay, he's born in Bethlehem, then they make the long journey back to Nazareth. This is where he's going to grow up. He spent most of his time in Nazareth before he really started out on his missionary journey and, starting to spread the gospel and collect his disciples and all that kind of stuff. And he really started not that far from Nazareth. So, we learn little bit about this from Luke, because of course he was the historian. So Luke chapter 2, verses 39 and 40. "And when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him." So why should you care? I've had many groups before be like, yeah, Nazareth going to the Basilica, yeah, we can just skip that. We've done that before. And I'm always kind of saddened when I hear that, because it is so amazing to think about Jesus's humanity. Obviously, Lord and Savior, God everything, but there was a time where he was deeply connected to humanity, and he lived this human life. He would have played and scraped his knee, and to think of him in that context, I think, is really important. And of course, just he grew up as part of a family as well. He learned Joseph's craft. He became a carpenter. And we talk about, him being a carpenter a lot, but don't really connect that, he would have learned that in Nazareth.
Right.
He would have participated in the daily village life. He would have had friends. He would have perhaps gone with Mary to the market to get flour to make bread, things like this. He lived very simply, very quietly, and faithfully. So, when you're in Nazareth, if you kind of want to get a sense of what Jesus's life growing up would have been like, they actually have an amazing recreation there. It's called Nazareth Village. So for anybody that's been to Colonial Williamsburg, think Colonial Williamsburg, but it's in the time of Jesus. So everybody's, dressed up in biblical attire. They're showing you how they would have crushed olives for oil and ground flour, and how they would have, made clothes from wool and everything else. So, it's an amazing reconstructed first century farm and village. So you really would get an idea of where Mary came from, probably an agricultural family. They do have carpenters there that show you what carpentry would have been like in the time of Joseph and Jesus. And so you get to see all these live demonstrations that'll really connect you to, like, this would have been the way Jesus grew up and the kind of environment he would have been in.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's, especially they're still showing you how it would have been in those times. That's one of my favorite parts about it. So Nazareth can also be seen as a bridge between prophecy and fulfillment. We'll go over a little bit of that here. So start with the movement from Nazareth to Bethlehem here. So I'm going to read Luke chapter 2, verses 4 and 5 here. So, and Joseph also went up from the Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, to be registered with Mary. So Nazareth is the starting point of the journey that leads to Jesus' birth in Bethlehem. The census under Caesar Augustus is the historical mechanism God uses to fulfill Micah chapter 5, verse 2 there. So with this, some talking points for pilgrims that are visiting. God works through ordinary logistics, like census travel, to bring about divine fulfillment. And standing in Nazareth helps pilgrims connect the dots between prophecy and fulfillment.
And now we can talk a little bit more about modern-day Nazareth and the interfaith community there, and why it matters to visit beyond just the historical context and, of course, Jesus. So, today's Nazareth, and I've tried to really hit this point, it is an incredible blend of Christian and Muslim communities. You can go to the old city market and see it. They have amazing traditional foods. You've got local artisans. There are, of course, the historic churches that we like to visit. But just spending some time in Nazareth, and we even have groups that'll customize and they'll actually stay in Nazareth when they're up in the Galilee area instead of staying on the Sea of Galilee, to be able to participate and learn more about the amazing community there. But, when your pilgrims visit, they're truly going to gain a fuller understanding of the living Christian presence is still in the Holy Land. And it's when you're shopping there and going to the restaurants, helping to support that local Christian community, that's always something we really try to encourage and push. So, Nazareth can be an excellent hub for exploring the Galilee, which is why we do have some groups stay there. You're only 30 minutes from Cana. You're about 45 to 60 minutes from the Sea of Galilee sites like Capernaum, the Mount of Beatitudes, and Magdala. A lot of times it's less. We err towards the higher side because during the peak busy times, for sure, there's definitely traffic. Going that April to October kind of peak time. But they have lovely local hotels there, and it's very practical to stay.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, in close proximity to a lot of other very important sites. And it's really cool that, they can also, if they do something custom in Nazareth really speaks to a travel advisor, we could, look at overnighting them in Nazareth as well to get more, immersed.
Well, it's definitely a slower pace. So when you're in Tiberias, it's a bigger tourist town for sure. There's a lot more hotels. It can even feel a little more touristy sometimes, whereas Nazareth still feels very much like a normal city. So if you're wanting to immerse yourself in the interfaith community and learn about how Jews, Christians, and Muslims all live together and what like a more normal day in the life is like, Nazareth is definitely a much better place for that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's some great insight there in Nazareth as well. And so now we'll go into spiritual reflections pilgrims can take home. So some key things that you want to emphasize here is God values humility and hiddenness. So Nazareth reflects God's upside down kingdom. God enters ordinary places, not just the extravagant places, enters ordinary places. Pilgrims may reflect on how God works in their own Nazareth moments, where, there might be so much going on in our world to where we can really kind of relate to Nazareth in some ways of, how our lives are.
God showing up in just those small little moments that, in a typical day you think are so insignificant, and you look back and you're like, wow, that little moment, like I was so worried about everything that's going on in the world and all that kind of stuff. But, that little insignificant moment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's not a bad thing there. And also Nazareth is where the Christmas story truly begins, as we said. And visiting Nazareth obviously helps the Bible come alive, especially Luke 1 and Matthew 2. And it's also, if we read a little bit into the Luke 1, this would be chapter 40, or verse 46 through 49. My soul magnifies the Lord, for he has looked on the humble estate of his servant. And pilgrims often connect deeply with this verse on the ground in Nazareth as well.
Absolutely, for sure. So, we'll definitely thank you all for joining us today. But before we sign off, we're going to talk a little bit about why Nazareth must be on every Holy Land itinerary. And I am a huge proponent of this. It truly grounds the Christmas story. It reveals the heart of God and the humility that he searches for. You connect prophecy back from the Old Testament to the history and the daily life that Jesus would have experienced. It really will deepen your understanding of the Holy Family. Like so many people skip to the end of the Gospels. They focus on the ministry and then that last week of his life, and they forget, the 32 years that led up to before that last year. So it definitely inspires reflection on God's work in ordinary places. So I encourage everyone, if you're talking to a client about visiting the Holy Land, or you want to visit the Holy Land yourself, make sure you're looking at an itinerary where you'll have the opportunity to visit Nazareth, because it's definitely worth it. It's a place where God's plan took root and where pilgrims can rediscover the power of saying yes to God. So once again, I'll just say thank you all for tuning in today, and we're excited to continue this Christmas series. So make sure that you like what we're doing. Go ahead and leave us a review or a like. And if you want to go ahead and get notified for the next Christmas episode, you can subscribe and turn on notifications on whatever your favorite podcast platform is. But for now, I will say goodbye, everybody, and we look forward to you joining us next time.
Very good. Take care.